Braden Schneider is back with the Rangers on a 2-year deal worth $2.2 million per season. We talk about why this is an excellent deal for the Rangers, why this could impact Jacob Trouba moving forward, and whether Braden Schneider could be a Ranger for life.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1111 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Indeed. Still searching for a great candidate for your company? Don't search, just match with Indeed. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. So Rangers making a couple of moves since the last time that we talked. You know, the weekend goes by here and they re-signed Chad Ruhwedel. They get Braden Schneider under contract for 2 years going forward. And they also come to an agreement with another one of their own impending players, an RFA, and that would be Matthew Robertson. So 3 defensemen. Today we're going to hone in on Braden Schneider, obviously the most important and most impactful of the bunch, and we'll cover the other 2 in a future episode. But Schneider gets a well-deserved pay bump from his ELC, which paid him $925,000 per season. You know, RFAs only have so much leverage in the NHL. That's just the way that it's structured. But the Rangers seem to do right by Braden Schneider here, giving him, once again, a sizable pay bump and getting him to $2.2 million per season. It feels about right and about fair for both sides. For what it's worth, he also gets a $125,000 signing bonus. And his actual salary for this upcoming year will be $1.635 million. And then the year after that, it'll be $2.64 million. But the way it works in the NHL is that the cap hit is always evenly distributed, regardless of how much, the actual take-home pay is for the player, so to speak. But it's going to be $2.2 million against the cap per season for Braden Schneider on this new contract that he has with the New York Rangers. And when this contract expires, for anybody looking down the road and wondering what the future might hold for Braden Schneider, he will be, once again, a restricted free agent. At that time, though, he will also have arbitration rights, and he will also be 2 years away from being an unrestricted free agent. And we're going to dive into Braden Schneider's future with the Rangers a little bit in greater detail a little bit later in today's episode. But for now, to just run through his stats and then also the role that I foresee for Braden Schneider for this upcoming season. 206 games now in the NHL in the regular season, 12 goals, 36 assists, 48 points, plus 13. He has averaged 15.44 of ice time per night, 315 block shots, 374 hits. And this past season, a lot of career highs, 82 games, which obviously is a career high. He played all 82, also played all 16 playoff games for the Rangers. Tied his career high of 5 goals, a career high 14 assists, a career high 19 points, a career high 15.54 of ice time per night, a career high 133 block shots, and a career high 167 hits. And it's great that the Rangers have him locked up, at least for the short term. I think, again, there's probably going to be, at a certain point, you'll see the Rangers go to more years and more dollars with Braden Schneider. And I do think he's somebody that they should want to keep around and somebody that they ultimately will keep around. But as for the short term, and next season specifically, we'll see how the Rangers line up. But my personal preference would be to see Braden Schneider out there on the second pairing along with K'Andre Miller. That's obviously a duo that we saw a decent amount this past season. Jacob Trouba struggled, and then, of course, he was injured as well, and they went with Braden Schneider and K'Andre Miller on the second pairing, and those two played well together. And then going into the playoffs, we saw those two together again. They switched back. I want to say it was game 6 between the Canes and the Rangers, and they flip-flopped Trouba and Schneider. So Trouba was back with Miller, and Schneider was on the third pairing with Gustafsson. But once we got a little taste of that, that pairing, and once the Rangers experimented with it a little bit, they were always pretty quick to go back to it, that being Miller and Schneider. And I think there's a good chance that, for me at least, that is the best second pairing for the Rangers. That is the ideal pairing. You can always take it a step further and split up Fox and Lindgren if you want to do that and get really fancy as far as the defense pairings are concerned. But my preference for this upcoming season on opening night and for the foreseeable future, if we assume Jacob Trouba is still going to be with this team, which it feels like he probably will, no guarantees, but it feels like they're going in that direction, then my ideal lineup, Lindgren and Fox, give me Miller and Schneider. and then give me Jones and Trouba. And that's how I would like to see them line up. Schneider just was a better player than Jacob Trouba this past season. And on top of that, Keandre Miller seemed to do better when he was out there with Braden Schneider than he did with Jacob Trouba. Now, do I think that they're going to line up that way on opening night? I honestly don't. I feel like a lot of people might be jumping the gun a little bit, and there's a chance they'll line up that way. But I get the feeling we could see Miller and Trouba together on the second pairing to start the season, and Braden Schneider will be in his familiar role on the third pairing, this time with Jones rather than Gustafson. But there's been a messy situation with Jacob Trouba this offseason. It's kind of dominated the headlines as far as Ranger news is concerned, and certainly we've talked about it on here quite a bit. I feel like this might be a little bit of a make good by the Rangers for their captain. Like, okay, we're going to give you a chance. You're back and no hard feelings, and we're going to toss you back out there in your usual role on the second pairing alongside Keandre Miller. I think there's actually a pretty decent chance that the Rangers end up doing that as a way for them to save face, as a way for Jacob Trouba in some ways to save face and give the captain every opportunity that you can afford to give him to take the opportunity to remain in the top four going forward for the Rangers. I do think there's a decent chance of that happening, and Braden Schneider would start on the third pairing. Something that I've said about Braden Schneider, though, and I'll kind of double down on it here, is that he, for however long he's been in the league now, 3 seasons, having him on your third pair has basically been a luxury. I don't think there's too many teams around the NHL that have a third pair defenseman that's as good as Braden Schneider. And obviously, Schneider has worked his way into a bigger role as the seasons have gone on here. And we saw him as a fixture in the top 4 this past season for really the first time in his career. And there could be more of that. But again, my preference, Schneider's in the top 4 over Trouba. What I think the Rangers will do, at least to start the season, is the opposite of that. I think they'll put Jacob Trouba alongside Keandre Miller on the second pairing, and you'll see Braden Schneider out there with Zach Jones. But as far as Schneider and what else to expect from him this season, I mean, regardless of which pairing he's on, I feel like you could get to a point here where you begin to see Braden Schneider on the ice at bigger points in the game. You might see his ice time get a little bit of an uptick. It's always been, for 3 seasons now, 15 minutes and some amount of seconds for 3 straight years for Braden Schneider. He's always been between 15 and 16 minutes a game per night. I think that could see a little bit of an uptick this season. I think you might see Braden Schneider out there a little bit more often when it comes to the penalty kill. When it comes to the PK, it's usually the top 4 guys that the Rangers roll with, and you can certainly understand where they're coming from there. They tend to flip-flop the pairings when it comes to the PK. They put Fox with Miller, and they put Lindgren with Trouba, and they might continue to do that. But I would be surprised if Braden Schneider doesn't carve out a little bit more of a bigger role for himself when it comes to the Rangers being shorthanded. And on top of that, even late in games, not that they shy away from putting Schneider on the ice, but when it comes down to the nitty gritty parts of the game, Rangers are up by a goal, a minute left, 2 minutes left, whatever it might be, you tend to see the top 4 defensemen on the ice for the Rangers. And I just get the feeling that Braden Schneider, as he continues to get better and really establish himself and really come into his own, you'll see him, being used a little bit more, aggressively, I guess is the word, by Peter Laviolette and the coaching staff. You got to remember, it was Peter Laviolette's first year as the Ranger head coach. So it's his first look at Braden Schneider, and everything else being equal, Laviolette and a lot of, other coaches around the league, they tend to lean on their veterans in spots like that. But I don't think Laviolette is so stubborn that he wouldn't make an adjustment in situations like that in the game if he felt that it was warranted. So we'll see. But again, I just feel like Braden Schneider, you're going to see his role continue to expand. You'll see him get more ice time. You'll see him used in different situations. I think the Rangers are high on Schneider, and I think they should be, because really, ever since they drafted him and ever since he made his NHL debut, he's been, there's hiccups every now and then. He's a defenseman. He's a young defenseman. Every now and then there's, a whoops moment, I guess. But for the most part, he's just been very steady, very reliable for this Ranger team. And it kind of feels like him and Jacob Trouba are going in opposite directions as far as their career trajectory is concerned. So again, I do think you'll see Braden Schneider carve out a bigger role for himself going forward, and rightfully so. I think it's been well earned, and we'll see how it goes this year for Schneider, but I think that's probably the direction this whole thing is heading. So we're going to keep everything rolling in just a second. I want to talk about some winners and losers of this Braden Schneider re-signing here. Of course, once again, he is back with the team on a 2-year deal. We'll get to that and a bunch of other things in just a couple of minutes. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Indeed. We are driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, we just want to go ahead and keep everything rolling here and give a big shout out to the everydayers as always. Thank you guys as you always do for supporting this show, tuning in, watching, listening, whatever you got to do, however you do it. We really do appreciate it. Going forward, we're going to continue to bring you guys all the latest news from the Ranger offseason. As I mentioned earlier in today's episode, the Rangers re-signed 2 other defensemen. Chad Ruedel is back with the team, as is Matthew Robertson. We'll see if Robertson ever makes his NHL debut, but at the least, he is still in the organization. Going to discuss both of those players in the next episode. Also, our crossover with Locked On Penguins will probably be happening this week. I will keep you guys posted there as well. Going to be talking to those guys about Riley Smith, among a handful of other topics as well. But as for today, the Braden Schneider show, winners and losers from this contract. It's really hard to come up with any losers from this. I mean, I think it's a good signing. I think most fans are pretty happy about this, pretty on board with this. I guess there was always a really small chance with Schneider being an impending RFA that maybe they would deal him, but I don't think so. You know, they took him in the first round. They seem really happy with him. He, for the most part, has played very well. Still just 22 years old, off to a solid start for his NHL career. And I said coming into free agency this offseason, whether we're talking about Ranger UFAs or Ranger RFAs, Braden Schneider, to me, head and shoulders above everybody else. This is the guy that the Rangers needed to lock up, needed to get under contract, and need to keep in the fold next year. And all signs indicated that they would eventually do just that. And of course, now it's official. The 2-year deal for Schneider worth $2.2 million. But anyway, back to winners and losers here. The only real loser that I can come up with for this deal, and he's not even really much of one, would be Jacob Trouba. I'm sure Trouba's happy for his teammate, but as we know, he's kind of been on shaky grounds with the organization this offseason. You know, that whole story that broke and series of stories and what's going on here. Is he going to be traded to Detroit? Is his wife's residency holding things up? There were a million questions that were unanswered, and in most cases still are unanswered. But the bottom line, Jacob Trouba at best right now is on shaky grounds with the Rangers. I don't think there's a chance that Jacob Trouba plays out his contract with the Rangers. He's got 2 more years left on his deal. I'm starting to believe he will be there for opening night for this upcoming season and probably will play the entire season there. But he's got 1 year left, and that's when the Rangers need that money for other things. One way or another, they're going to say bye to Jacob Trouba by next offseason at the latest. But the reason I say he's a loser here is because with every Ranger defenseman that they kind of lock into a contract, or this guy's going to be in the lineup, or this guy's going to be over here, every new defenseman that's in the fold, it makes it that much more difficult to see any scenario where Jacob Trouba will be with this team. He'll be here for 24-25, but I don't think there's any chance he'll be here for 25-26. And the fact that Braden Schneider is now under contract and pretty much guaranteed to be a Ranger for the next 2 seasons and hopefully beyond that, again, it just makes Jacob Trouba that much more expendable. So I think he is, in a roundabout way, kind of a loser of this deal. But we have a couple of winners here. The aforementioned K'Andre Miller. Miller, since becoming a Ranger, has had his fair share of ups and downs, but I do think this pairing between him and Braden Schneider, for the most part, clicked last season. The 2 of them seem to gel pretty well together. And for the most part, again, I do think K'Andre Miller played better with Braden Schneider. So Miller is a winner for that reason. And again, we have no idea. We'll see how the Rangers line up on opening night. But even if they go with Miller and Trouba as their second pairing, I feel like it's only a matter of time before we eventually get Braden and Miller together. Even if Jacob Trouba shows up this season, he's fired up and ready to lead this team and ready to show all the doubters like me that we don't know what we're talking about. And hey, look, if Jacob Trouba makes me eat crow next season, nobody will be happier about it than me. But if all those things happen, even if all those things happen, I do feel like we will eventually get to a point where we're looking at a second pair of Miller and Schneider for the New York Rangers. That's probably that could be the short term, and it's almost definitely going to be the long term one way or another. Because again, I think at best, Jacob Trouba has one season left on this Ranger team. But K'Andre Miller, like I said, ups and downs, but he seemed to really have a good rapport with Braden Schneider this upcoming season. And one way or another, I do think we'll eventually see that duo together, probably this season. And again, no later than next season. And I know that Miller's an RFA at that time, but he's another player that I think the Rangers will probably look to keep in the fold. We'll see how it goes. Another winner of this deal. Look, we got to give some props to Chris Drury and really the entire Ranger front office. We know that Drury is another, I was about to say player. He used to be a player for the Rangers, but another member of the Ranger family, we shall say, that has had his ups and downs, since taking the position of the GM. I do think for the most part, he's done a lot of good things for this team. And obviously under his watch, they've gone from, a team that was on the outside of the playoffs looking into a bona fide Stanley Cup contender. And I think he deserves a fair amount of credit for that. I do think that he had a rough trade deadline this past year, and the free agency signing period, I know technically it's still going, but all the big name free agents have signed with one team or another. That wasn't great either. It wasn't a disaster. It's not like he did anything that's going to screw this Ranger team over for years to come. I think a lot of us were just looking for a little bit more, but the bottom line, this is another very team friendly, very, solid contract for both sides. And I mentioned, the fact that Braden Schneider was an RFA. RFAs have very, very little leverage when it comes to situations like this, especially if they do not have arbitration rights. I mean, in some ways, the team can almost name the price that the player is going to sign for. So, that being the case, Drury could have played harder ball than this and maybe made Braden Schneider sign for an even lesser amount of money. If you do that, though, whether you're the Rangers or anybody else, then you risk, kind of alienating that player. And you also create a situation where that player is going to walk in free agency the first chance that he gets. And so I think a deal like this makes it cost effective for the Rangers, but it also keeps Braden Schneider happy. He gets a sizable pay raise from his ELC, once again, from $925K to $2.2 million per season. So that's obviously a good thing. And I think this is another win. You get a rock solid defenseman here in Braden Schneider, a young player. You lock him up for 2 years. And you cross the bridge when you get to it, as far as, the next time that his contract is up. At that time, he will be an RFA once again. Another winner of this whole deal is the Rangers physicality department, and specifically Ranger fans who want more physicality from this team, which I think is pretty much all of us. Pretty much any hockey team, hockey fan, whatever it might be, you're always looking for a little bit more when it comes to the physicality department. And look, Braden Schneider, he's somebody that goes out there and throws his weight around. We've seen some pretty massive hits from Schneider over the years, and he always keeps it on the clean side of things. There was an incident years ago where he was playing for Canada at the World Juniors, and he ended up getting suspended for, kind of a bad hit. He got somebody in the head, and there has not been so much as the slightest amount of controversy surrounding any Braden Schneider hit since then. I mean, he will whack you if he gets a chance, but it never really seems to cross the line. It always seems clean. And for what it's worth, he will occasionally fight. I had to look this up. 4 fights for Schneider since joining the NHL. None last season, but it appears that, again, he'll drop the gloves when the time is right and the situation calls for it. There was a situation against the Devils during his rookie season where he delivered a heck of a hit. And then Sharon Govich on the Devils at the time, he jumped Schneider, and it didn't go very well for Sharon Govich. We'll just say that Braden Schneider was the decisive winner. But again, for any fan of this team that wants more physicality and wants more toughness and wants more size, well, Braden Schneider's right there for you, and he'll be a Ranger for at least the next 2 seasons, and in all likelihood, probably quite a while beyond that as well. So, and in fact, that's what we're going to talk about. Good segue there. We're going to talk about Braden Schneider's long-term future with the New York Rangers. Could he even be a Ranger for life? We'll discuss that coming up here on Locked On New York Rangers in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here. So Braden Schneider, again, signs this 2-year deal. It's something of a bridge deal. And obviously, again, he'll be an RFA once his current contract runs out. Will he be a Ranger for life? I mean, it's hard to predict that. Not that many players in the NHL end up sticking with the same team for their entire career. That seems to be an increasing rarity these days. Even some of the best to ever do it, they end up on another team, at or near the end of their career. It's not to say that it never happens. Somebody's spending their entire career with one team, but it's just the nature of the business. So I can't sit here and make a prediction that Braden Schneider is going to be a Ranger for life. But I will say this. I did pitch the idea earlier this offseason, because again, every offseason We go through the entire list of Ranger UFAs. We go through the entire list of Ranger RFAs. We look at free agents from other teams, the whole 9 yards. It's the offseason, and it's fun to do deep dives into these things. But the reason I wanted Braden Schneider locked up, really long-term, a couple of reasons. First of all, his age, 22 years old. That's difficult to believe because it feels like he's been here for a while, and he will be entering year 4, if you can believe that. Year 4 of Braden Schneider being a New York Ranger. Debuted when he was just 20, but he's got age on his side. On top of that, just a very strong, solid start to his career. Just one of those guys that's very reliable. You pencil him into the lineup, and you just really don't worry about him very much. You also, if you're the Rangers, have a need to shore up the blue line because there's a lot of mainstays when it comes to Ranger defensemen as far as the current lineup is constructed. Fox has been there a while, Lindgren, Miller, Trouba, and even Schneider about to enter year 4. But a lot of those guys I just mentioned are facing, somewhat uncertain futures with the Rangers. Obviously, the messy situation with Trouba. Ryan Lindgren is still an impending RFA. You never know how that's going to shake out. And Keandre Miller, I think he'll be here long term, but he always feels like one of those guys that might creep up as far as like a trade candidate is concerned. If there's a situation where the Rangers need more cap space, somebody that maybe could be had. I wouldn't be campaigning too hard to trade Keandre Miller, but it's a possibility that's at least on the table. And Zach Jones, we'll see if he can carve out a role for himself this upcoming season. But really the only one that you can really look at and be like, yeah, he's going to be here a while, will be Adam Fox. So I think for somebody like Braden Schneider, who again has been such a consistent player for this team, it just makes all the sense in the world for the Rangers to try to lock him up long-term, especially when you consider that when you look at Schneider, you look at his game, there are no red flags there. There's no reason to believe that a Braden Schneider contract would age poorly, again, especially if you consider his young age. But here's why the Rangers aren't going to do that. Sign him long-term, at least not yet. And stop me if you've heard me say this before, but the Ranger in-house free agent class for this upcoming season is a doozy. Not this upcoming season, the next offseason, basically a year from now. You've got Igor, you've got Lafreniere, you've got Miller. All these guys need new contracts. And if you really want to extend the list, Capo Caco, I guess you could throw Riley Smith in there as well, although I think he's pretty much going to be one and done with the Rangers. But even guys like Cooley, like Rempe, like Edstrom, all those guys will be RFAs, and they'll all need at least a small pay raise. So there's that to consider as well. And that being the case, the Rangers weren't going to, at least not yet, commit to Schneider long-term and for the amount of money that he probably would have wanted if he wanted to sign a long-term deal. And it's funny how that works because a lot of times when you're looking around the league and if you're the Rangers and you're looking at this UFA or that UFA, something the Rangers can do and something that they did with Vincent Trocheck is you can keep the average annual value as low as possible if you give them more years. But when you're as young as Braden Schneider, it kind of works in the opposite direction because he's not going to sign like a 6 or 7 year deal worth like $3 million per season because he probably figures he can get more than that. Right now, again, sizable pay bump. I'm sure he's happy about that. And in 2 years, we'll cross that bridge and we'll see how everything looks with Braden Schneider. But the really important thing to consider here, again, is that free agency class. And I don't think you want to pay Braden Schneider the amount of money it would take per season to extend him long-term and then not have enough money for guys like, Lafreniere and Igor Shesterkin. You guys know the list by now, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it makes more sense to do what they did, extend him for just 2 years at $2.2 million. And then when he's an RFA, that's the same offseason that Artemi Panarin is a UFA. That's the same offseason that Jacob Trouba is a UFA. I believe Trouba will be gone for all the reasons that I mentioned a little while ago and even on previous episodes. I think he'll be on his way by then. But Panarin, that could go either way. I feel like there's a better chance of him sticking around if the Rangers win a Stanley Cup before his contract expires. We'll see how that goes. I don't know that they'll pay him as much money in the future as they're paying him now, but that's a different conversation for a different day. The bottom line is that Braden Schneider, his contract ends the same year that Panarin's and Trouba's end. And there will be plenty of money to get him signed to a long-term deal. I mean, Panarin and Trouba, those two alone combined for almost $20 million per season. So you can certainly dive into that reserve there, if you will, and, sign Braden Schneider long-term if that's what, you want to do. So I think that might be what the Rangers are thinking. And I do get the feeling that once his contract comes up again in 2 years, it'll be a similar situation as this one where Braden Schneider is one of the priorities for that offseason. Again, that's the offseason after the next one. So 2 years from now, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But it would seem like Braden Schneider at that point would be easily affordable for the New York Rangers. And the only other aspect to discuss of this whole thing, at least for today's episode, we could talk about this again in the future. We got plenty of time before the season starts. But How does this impact the Rangers currently as far as the salary cap constraints are concerned? So right now, this is after the Braden Schneider signing. It's after the also the signings of Chad Ruedel and Matthew Robertson. And like I said, we'll talk about those two in a future episode, possibly as soon as the next episode. But right now, the Rangers are showing $5.12 million left in salary cap space. And really, the only big thing left on their checklist for this offseason would seemingly be to get a new contract done with Ryan Lindgren. And we always knew that was going to be kind of the tricky one. And the Braden Schneider one was kind of straightforward. The Lindgren one, like I said, it's a little bit iffy, and it could go a bunch of different ways. It sounds like, by all accounts, that the bigger issue between the Rangers and Ryan Lindgren right now is in terms of the length of the contract as opposed to the dollar amount of the contract. It sounds like Ryan Lindgren wants to sign a long-term deal with the Rangers. Rangers are understandably hesitant to do that because he does play such a physical style. He does take such a beating out there and has had a decent amount of injuries over his first handful of seasons in the NHL. So we'll see how that goes. But that $5.12 million, at least some of that's going to go to Ryan Lindgren. It'll probably be approaching $4 million. And then going into the year, Rangers will be at a situation where they have 1.2 million, 1.3 million, somewhere in that ballpark. And, we'll see if they want to do anything else or let the salary cap space accrue heading into the trade deadline and make a move or two then. We'll see how this whole thing shakes out. With Lindgren, it could go a bunch of different ways, but that's kind of where things stand. And I, for one, very happy that the Rangers have at least committed to Braden Schneider in the long term. And I think 2 years from now, very, very good chance you're going to see them commit to Schneider in the long term as well. But I figure we can pretty much call it there for today. A couple other things to run through quickly here. The Hartford Wolfpack has released its schedule. They will start their season on Saturday, October 12th at Lehigh Valley. And then their first home game will be their second game of the season, and that will be Friday, October 18th. And we're also going to do a Wolfpack-themed episode sooner or later at some point in the offseason here, just kind of break everything down that's happening there. Obviously, a new coach, and see what players are going to be leading the way for the Wolfpack this season. We'll definitely do that in a future episode. Also, the Fantasy League, I want to mention this really quick. If you were in the Fantasy League last year and you want to play again this year, all you have to do is send me an email or DM on Twitter. Just let me know, hey, I played last year, I'm coming back. If you were not in the league last year and you want to get in this year, send me an email or a DM on Twitter. We'll hold your place in line. And, based on how many people don't return from last year, we'll see if we can get you a spot in the league. But that's where things stand there. And also looking to do a mailbag episode in the not too distant future as well. So if you have any questions, worries, inquiries about the Rangers or whatever it might be, feel free to send it my way. And like I said, very good chance we'll use your question in a future episode of Locked On New York Rangers. But that will do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, at @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's at @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to the Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.